Hello again. Welcome back to Moving With Me, the podcast, where actions have meaning, words have meaning, and we open up the conversations to discover what's your next move. I'm your host, Krystal. I have another guest, which we share something in common. But first, we need to set that theme. So let's go ahead and do that. The word of the day is epiphany. Uh-oh, we are hitting some powerful words now. This is the intuitive grasp of reality in a pivotal moment. No one really knows what, when, how, or why the timing of these revelations, but we certainly know where, and that is you. Give yourself some credit for this. Have you ever had a moment where you had a sudden manifestation or perception that gave you a full sense of clarity or understanding of the nature or meaning within some aspect of your life? It doesn't have to be one. There could be many. One day I'll share my thoughts, but today is all about my guest story. So let's give him the floor. Adrian, why don't you introduce yourself to the people and tell us what you are going to share with us today?
Absolutely. Hello, Krystal. It's lovely to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
So my background is quite varied. I've lived a pretty full life. I've travelled over 45 countries. I now participate in quite extreme endurance events around the world. So I was in the Arctic Circle in March. I'm heading to Greece next week and to Panama next year as well, all sort of participating in a sort of multi-endurance events. Professionally, I buy and sell businesses, and I've built up a children's education group. Yeah, life is pretty good, but it certainly wasn't always that way. And a big theme in my particular journey has been sort of overcoming inner demons, with some of those being things like alcohol and other addictions. Yeah, I'm here to sort of share a bit more, I guess.
Well, let's go ahead and start off with, I believe everything started kind of in college, or at least that's where you want to begin, if that's cool with you.
Yeah, so it was just before college for me, really. I went backpacking around Europe when I was 18, had an amazing time. It was really on a high, like a natural high of life, and just came back from that just like transformed, like life could not have been better. And then shortly after that, I went like the opposite way and had a nervous breakdown. And that led me to sort of changing my careers. I mean, I was only 19 at the time, so still so young. I decided that I didn't want to go straight into work. I wanted to go off to university. I went off to college, and after 3 weeks, I dropped out. Decided actually it wasn't for me. The course I had signed up for, which was construction management, I just knew instantly. I was like, I can't see myself doing this for the rest of my life. But I've always been quite entrepreneurial, and within those first 3 weeks of being at college, I'd actually started a business, a student events company, and was very sort of busily and hurriedly sort of pulling together the sort of the foundations of what actually turned out to be quite a nice little business. And I ended up staying at college for 3 years. First of all, putting on different events for students, and we'd go off and we'd like charge local companies who wanted to advertise to the student market, and we'd generate money from that way. And then rather than being at other people's student nights, we started hosting our own. It went really well, and we got to the stage where we had 4 nights a week, which like different bars in different parts of town and different themes to it. But 4 of the 7 nights we were running these student parties, which was amazing. Like, it was an amazing time. We were like the cool kids because we were the ones who were organising the parties. We had all of the free tickets. We were given literally crates full of alcohol by the bar owners to help entice people in. Everybody wanted to know us. We wanted to know everybody. There was after parties after the main party. It was great. And I was right at the centre of it. It was just an amazing experience.
So I want to jump in here. This reminds me of my college days. Incredibly followed just exactly how you... And that's crazy because you didn't go to university in America, right? But the same... The same
Yeah.
setup actually exists. There were many entertainment and production type of businesses that were throwing these kinds of parties. And I didn't really pay much attention to them until it came to my boyfriend at the time, now my husband, his own business venture of a similar approach. But theirs had meaning behind it, I suppose. Like each party was supposed to bring awareness to something. And this fit his friends perfectly. They are some very intelligent individuals and were very much like brothers. The way they would promote these awareness concepts was through throwing these parties at nightclubs. Now, I was supportive of my husband, but I was also like in the back of my head, I was thinking, like, how in the world would you get people to listen to the concepts if they were too inebriated to process it? It was a great opportunity, but with a flawed campaign. I just remember thinking, like, there's various ways to go about this, kind of like going after people's sobriety, if you will, and engaging in that kind of activity to generate income. I just didn't see how that would go. It kind of didn't go anywhere, but it just reminded me of how people kind of go about seeking that kind of vice, if you will, to really develop a business. But anyway, go ahead. I just wanted to jump in and add that little tidbit.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly didn't have the any of the intellect behind what we were doing in terms of trying to associate particular meanings or messages. We were just out for a good time. Yeah, and a good time we had, that was for sure. This carried on over a period of 3 years until my friends were graduating. So I'd been there that whole time, been living with them, having a great time. I'd had my own education in my own way, in which I spent 3 years building this business. And by the time we moved on from it, it was, we had multiple event nights. We had a paid weekly column in the newspaper. We had all this advertising. We'd started a charity, a student-focused charity that's still run by one of the counties, like one of the states here in the UK. But it was clear to me that I didn't want to be, I was only 23 at the time, but I didn't want to be that 30-year-old or 40-year-old still doing the student thing. I wanted to move on. So that was quite an easy and quick decision for me. And then I went into the working world, and I wanted to build and develop my skills and start to see what else I was capable of. But I had this relationship with alcohol where during the previous years, alcohol had been nothing but a good time. It had been a confidence booster. It had opened up experiences that I don't think I would have experienced had I not had alcohol. And this is a very, very common situation. I believe is why a lot of people drink, is for the, saying in England, the Dutch courage. So, just that false sense of confidence. And so when I went into the working world, there was a big part of that overspilled into it. So the environments I was in, sales focused environments, you sort of work hard, quite high pressure sales environments. And what do you do when you're under high pressure? You need to go and release that pressure, which would often be quite wild nights out. And it was a different type of good time, but I could already sense that it wasn't quite, if the student days was a 10 out of 10, this was an 8.5 out of 10. It was already starting to, the relationship was already starting to shift somewhat, and I'm still having a good time, but it certainly wasn't painful, but it just wasn't quite the same. And then as I moved throughout my 20s, by this time I'd had quite a short-lived time in terms of employment, because I was wanting to be that entrepreneur and go back into that entrepreneurial journey, at which point, it's very, very tough starting a business. Very, very tough.
It is.
And particularly when you're in your sort of early to mid 20s and you're doing it by yourself, it's a tough journey. And I found my relationship with alcohol changing yet again, in which it became less about the fun, less about the social side, and more of a coping type mechanism, and more about, oh God, I've had such a hard day, or stressed, or I just need to go out and blow some steam, but get absolutely like, for want of a better phrase, annihilated, just completely like over the top. And then I moved to a city called Bristol. I was on like the west coast of the UK, really fun place, amazing music scene. I started associating with the wrong type of people. So those sort of nights out turned into like complete weekends. So like 2-3 days without going to sleep, just full on. And that's not me. Like, I am, like, in my bones, I'm someone who, like, I like to get up early. I like to be active. I like to go and do things and achieve things. And by achieve things, I don't mean necessarily like, taking on the world. But for me, like, I like to get up, make my bed. I've achieved something. And I like to go for a walk, achieve something. That's what I'm about, not staying out partying and being in this almost induced days for days, if that makes sense. And so that relationship with alcohol had kind of gone from like a 10 out of 10 in my student days until sort of my latter 20s, when it was probably down at, I'd say, like 4.5, maybe a 5. Like, it was noticeably different. And it's the same liquids, exactly the same drinks. I didn't really alter my drinks. I've never been a big beer drinker. I was mainly spirits, but it was very different experiences I was having. And that confidence, that Dutch courage that we get from drinking, particularly when we're quite early in our drinking phase or cycle, I think, you have a couple of drinks and you feel really good. That had also started to shift it as well, to the point where if I was going out to meet a group of people, I wouldn't sort of recognize it like consciously, but if I was nervous about it, then all of a sudden, I'd be turning up. I would have drunk so much that for me, I'm trying to act normal, but they can clearly see and smell like this guy's had a lot to drink. Started to turn quite dark, really. And this was as I moved into like the latter part of my 20s.
Quick question. Not really a question, just for a takeaway for me of what I want to say is like what I heard from you was it wasn't, we've left the social drinking aspect to more or less dealing with anxiety, dealing with maybe, depression, or dealing with stress, or dealing with different things that impact us mentally from a fatigue perspective. And it's one of those things where we were like, I don't even want to think about this. I don't want to breathe through this, because it takes a certain amount of time. It takes a certain amount of mental capacity to even do that. So it's like, okay, I'm already fatigued. It's going to take me a certain amount of mental capacity to even get over what I'm feeling right now. I'm trying to slow my heart rate, and just because I need to execute, I need to sell, I need to be present. And this is the quickest path to getting me over and getting me to the point of where I need to be. But then, of course, I didn't stop. I didn't have a limit of where, okay, I've hit my limit of, okay, the liquid courage is there. Now I have it. And let's keep moving, and I can stop my drinks. No, we just kept going past that. Is that what we're saying here?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there was a point when I literally couldn't stop. Like, it was, couldn't just have one. It would be one, which would very quickly lead to the next, one and so forth. And it was very much what you said, Krystal. Like, it was rooted in a fear of all of this. I want to say like ugly stuff inside. I don't mean it in the literal sense of, oh, that's an ugly person. Like, I don't believe in that. I think everyone's inherently like beautiful, as that's what we are as people. But I meant the ugly, horrible emotions and the thick clouds and all of that stuff that was feeding and growing, and the alcohol was feeding on top of that because it wasn't being confronted. So it was just getting like worse and worse, and it was all just like feeding on itself, if that makes sense. So it changes significantly, because at the very beginning, that none of that was really there. Like, you may have had a little bit of insecurity about meeting people, but what 19, 20-year-old doesn't? What 30, 40-year-old doesn't? It's a human thing. So I went into my 30s. I'd started a business. I'd failed many startups over my 20s. I look back on that and I talk about this a lot, which for me as my life has become more successful, I can directly correlate that to my personal growth directly. I look back now, I didn't understand at the time, but in hindsight, I can see it clearly that the things that stopped me from certainly being successful on the outside were all of like the inner demons and the inner struggles. And it wasn't a case of, oh, I'm going to try a new business and be successful at that. It was actually an inside out approach. I needed to stop looking out there, oh, this business will fix it or that one. And I needed to start looking internally and being like, why do I need this alcohol? Why do I need to drink this? Like, and actually dealing with that. And it was when I started to address those internal issues when the outside success started to come. And it sort of leads to one of my favorite sayings, which is success is subtraction. And it really is. It's not about adding the other business or adding the extra zero to your bank or whatever it is. It's when you take away the things that are holding you back, that's when you accelerate forward. And I've seen this repeatedly in my life when I gave up drinking coffee, when I gave up smoking cigarettes, when I gave up alcohol. Every single time I've addressed those internal issues, my life has taken many steps forward across the board. Not just like from a career perspective, but financially, from relationships, health, like everything has moved forward by not actually trying to do any of that, but by looking in and saying, you know what, I'm done with smoking. Like I am done with this, and I'm gonna get through this. I'm gonna focus on nothing but doing that. And that was the same with alcohol for me. Went into my 30s and I had started this business, and I ended up having that business for about 6 years, which was a long time. But like compared to what I'd done in the past, it wasn't too far into that journey when I'd really started to question the value that alcohol was bringing to my life. Like I was coming home from work. By this time I had met she's now my wife. We'd met and she provided a level of grounding, I think, to my life that I didn't have before. But with that grounding came I'm not going to come home and get obliterated because I'm with my partner. Like I don't want that. So that sort of reduced down to, I have 2, maybe 3 drinks, sometimes a little bit more, depending on how hard the day was or how stressed I was. But by this point, I was pretty much exclusively drinking by myself. I remember sort of like sitting there quite a few times, like on the sofa at home, having this drink, being like, right, I should be relaxed now because I've got this whiskey and coke in my hands or whatever it was. And not feeling that, but looking at the glass, being like, this isn't working. Like you used to work for me, you used to be my friend, and now you're not my friend. Why isn't this working? Why am I even bothering doing this? Because I know I'm going to wake up with a bit of a headache tomorrow, and I can almost guarantee that tomorrow morning I'm going to be a little bit off my mark, so I need to compensate for that. That was sort of the beginning of the turning point for me.
Wow. Because I had the reverse side of that with my alcoholism. I didn't want to let go. It wasn't that I looked at my glass and was like, oh, it's not working for me. My body told me it wasn't working for me. My body was the one that said, if you put another sip in your body, I'm going to cause you enormous amount of pain. I'm going to increase and double your anxiety. My body is what made me go, this isn't going to work. So it's interesting. The 2 different aspects that you bring is that yours was very mindful of that. And mine was very, to be quite frank, forced upon me. I just wanted to bring, a different appeal, if you will, to how we both dealt with alcoholism, but as well as how we came to a point where we question the change.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up because I think it's really important that people, particularly if drink is still a big part of your life, that you sort of recognise that. Because I've also, I have a lot of people come up to me and say and want to talk about being alcohol free, and for me it's been over 5.5 years now, not a single drop, and I'm extremely proud of that. And also very quick to say it's been the best decision I've ever made, like the best decision without question. But when people come speak, they're either inquiring because they're intrigued and they kind of like the idea, but they've still got these fears. And I think some of the fears are they're actually people tend to have this very similar fears around like the social aspects and how you manage that, etc. But then other people who have given up was like, I didn't have a choice. I physically had to give it up. It was forced upon me. All seems to be one or the other. I mean, with myself, so I started to question the value that this was bringing me, and this was over a period of a couple of years. Like in my late 20s, I'd already started this questioning process, and I became really curious about people who didn't drink. I remember reading an article that Bradley Cooper, the actor, the guy who's in like Limitless and a few of the other films, he didn't drink, and I couldn't believe it. I'd done like a few like web searches and saw that actually, yeah, he gave up quite young. He was in his mid-20s. When you read his story, you realise that he was an actor going nowhere. He was doing like getting very drunk and doing really stupid things to get attention, but then he was harming himself in the process. Like I think one of them was like punching or headbutting a wall. Like it was years ago I read this, but it was something like that. And then he realised that, you know, something had to change. And then he talks about how his career took off after giving up alcohol. And it's just a repeated story that I've heard in different flavours, and it was certainly the same for me. And so I'd already become interested in that. I hadn't really given too much thought about it other than, oh, it looks quite interesting. But then I had a couple of experiences where I was like, I really need to address this. So the first one was, I was going to a party. It was my friend's birthday party it was in central London. It's in Camden. It's a really like cool area. So, I drove into London, went to this party. It was a great time. We had a great time. They were all going on to another party after, and I just didn't want to go. I'd had a long week and I'd enjoyed myself. I wanted to leave on like a bit of a high, but I'd missed the train, and so I was left with this choice because they'd all gone on. I didn't really want to follow them. I was like, okay, well, what do? I could stay in London, but I didn't want to spend money on the hotel. And I was pretty drunk. So in my great wisdom, I decided to drive home. And it wasn't the first time I'd done drink driving. I'd done it like multiple times before. And so I had this even more confidence, this artificial confidence that I can do it. I've done it so many times. I haven't been caught or anything like that. And I remember driving through South London, sort of going, heading to like the motorway, and like seeing all these police cars, and they were all going by and being like, okay, this is really not great. Then before I knew it, I was home, and I woke up the next morning. My mate was texting me to see what had happened, and the shame and the embarrassment I felt because he knew I'd driven home because I left my car at his house. I just felt really shameful about it, and that jarred me. And I think that set the precursor for what ultimately decided for me to say, right, I need to take a break. I was on a work trip to Ukraine, of all places, and it was with a company I was looking to partner with. And we'd been speaking for quite some time, and we was going out to see their European offices, and we was on the plane on the way back. We had a really nice couple of days. And I think it was like a 3-hour flight or something. And so the natural thing for all of us to do was to, let's get some drinks, and we're just chill out and stuff like that. So we had a couple of drinks on there, like the miniature, like whiskeys and cokes, and then the plane wasn't that busy. So I said to the people I was with, I'm going to go and find some empty seat at the back, because essentially I'm feeling a bit tired. I just want to like switch off because I still got to drive home. And they were cool. They were fine with that. But when I got back there, I sort of had this in the back of my mind when I was suggesting this. I was like, I just want to carry on drinking, because they had stopped at 2 because they were driving as well. And I didn't want them to see me over drinking and driving. And so I ended up sitting back there, and I don't know how many I had, but it was quite a lot. And then I remember being at the airport saying bye to them, and like the look they were sort of giving me, it was kind of like you're carrying on drinking, haven't you? But nothing was being said. My car was parked at a car park. It was about a 10-15 minute car drive away. Like the airports in particularly in London, you kind of get parking at the airport. So you have these like car parks sort of outside, and you get like a bus or a taxi in. I got a taxi from the airport to my car, and the taxi driver was saying to me, like, "Oh, are you driving now?" I was like, yeah, I'm driving home. And it was a good long drive home. It was a good couple of hours to get home, and he was trying to talk me out of not driving. He could obviously smell it on me. I just remember this expression, and again, feeling that sense of shame, but I was like, oh, that'd be fine, I'm absolutely fine. So I got in the car on the drive home, and again, I managed to get home okay. But as soon as I got home, because we've been in Ukraine, which is Eastern Europe, like you have really cheap alcohol in Eastern Europe, and I bought some. So as soon as I got through the door, I started opening the bottles that I bought and just carried on and kept going and finished what I had. And it was the next morning when I woke up when I was like, that was not cool. Like, that was really, really not cool. And that was when I decided, like, right, you're having some time off from this. And that was like the beginning in many ways of becoming alcohol free.
Okay, so you know what? Let me ask this question to you. And I know you've already explained this, right? Of what you were coping with alcohol with it. Okay, so I'm going to ask it again, but this time the way that I had to reflect on it and see if it maybe jar something deeper. Okay, so essentially, what did the alcohol really help you cope with? Because there are the surface answers, and then if we really dig deep into that, we find out that it's about regressing or admitting your feelings about someone or something that you really want to believe in. But the reality is that the facts scare us to death. So, like, for example, for me, it was a way to live, okay? Like, actually to enjoy life. You talking about your backpacking at 19 and how you came back high on life and things like that. I didn't have that natural high. So when I was drinking, I was getting the enjoyment of living. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So I couldn't do that when there was this, air quote, this inner demon from my past trauma chasing me. And I refused to face it. Like, I was like, I'm not going to turn back and look at this and have to deal with this because I'm freaked out. Like, I'm terrified of this. So I use that word refuse because it wasn't like I was, or like something was holding me back from doing it. I was making this choice to refuse to deal with it. Now, sure, there was the shame and there was bitterness involved in that. And I guess I was thinking that if I allowed myself to like face this issue, it would deepen those feelings instead of reducing them, right? So I would become more bitter. I would become more shameful. It would invoke something in me that was negative versus having the inverse effect of that, which is to lessen that and to heal and to forgive and to move on. So I was running from this, and the only way I could do that was to numb myself from dealing with this, and I can only do it with alcohol. That's why I would ask that question to you again. I get the anxiety and, having to perform and having to really engage in social activity. But was there anything deeper beyond that that you may have suppressed that could possibly also be contributing to the alcoholism?
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a great, insightful question because there was. So for me, and this rooted back all the way to that nervous breakdown, I really struggled with my identity throughout my 20s, and even to some degree, I've never really got over it. Like, people have a midlife crisis, and I believe a lot of people have an identity crisis, particularly as they sort of turn like 20, and you all of a sudden you're going into the real world, and you don't quite know who you are. And for me, that was a big thing, because what I had fixed my identity on, like the person I wanted to be, wasn't necessarily who I was. So every time I looked at myself, I saw nothing but defects. So I wanted to be this flamboyant, entrepreneurial, sort of like center of everybody's party, like, yeah, that typical like flamboyant entrepreneur, I guess. But that wasn't inherently me. That's not my style. And I kind of felt that was the only way to be a successful entrepreneur, was to be that. And because I wasn't that, I started to beat myself up and to see nothing but defects. And it's sort of rooted in this again, this like this identity crisis. I've always been one of my friends at college said to me, she's like, you're the type of guy who will be 40 years old and still doesn't know what he wants to do with his life. And that's what makes you interesting. Well, I've just turned 38 and I still don't know what I want to do with my life. But that has led to, traveling the world, seeing and being in some very extreme environments and some very extreme situations, and has actually given a really joyous and fruitful life. Like, it all points back to the same thing, is that, I look at my sister as an example. My younger sister, ever since she was a child, like, she knew all she ever wanted to do was be a hairdresser, and she only ever saw herself as a hairdresser. And I remember looking at her as growing up thinking, you are so lucky to know that that's your purpose and that's what you want to do. You are so lucky, and you don't really meet many people who just know that, like, that's what I want to do, that's what I want to be. And she's still a hairdresser to this day. She's 35. And I didn't have that, and I really see that that's where a lot of this was actually stemming from. Is because I was in that role where, I'm being in that business role, that business setting, but I'm not quite being the person I see myself as. It makes me feel really insecure, so I'm gonna have another drink, because that made me feel more. And so it kind of
Okay, that's good. I'm glad that brought something up, because I think a lot of people are going to relate to that. So I think you've gotten out of that, and like you said, you looked at this and said, okay, what did life look like without alcohol, and what would it be, and what has it been? You want to kind of take us into that last little bit for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So before I actually gave up alcohol, when I was starting to explore what life looks like, all I could see was positives. Like, I couldn't see any downside other than, like, the fears. Well, how do you manage a social situation? And that's the biggest one in many ways. How are you going to handle, like, the parties? I mean, I'm never going to see my friends or family again. And what do I say when they say, oh, why aren't you drinking? Like, that was the only, I say downside. It wasn't a downside. It was just a fear. I genuinely couldn't see anything else. Like, it looked nothing but positive. And my experiences have been exactly that. It has been extremely positive. I do think that if you're in sort of the run-up period to making a decision to stop drinking alcohol, like, respect the fact that there is that run-up period, and that plays a role in this. Like, it's like just saying, right, I'm going to stop drinking alcohol now. I don't think it's a recipe for success. I think there's an element of education that comes beforehand, where you're starting to explore and listen to different podcasts and read different books and blogs and articles about life as being alcohol free and different strategies, and just building up some knowledge, so that what drinks would you drink if you was in a social setting and you wasn't drinking alcohol? Like, seriously, like, what would it be? Because there's so many alcohol free alternatives now. Like, for me, I don't actually really touch them anymore, but I relied on them very heavily in the beginning, and a lot of people do. So for me, it was, these 2 or 3 different brands of alcohol-free beer. In fact, I drank more beer as a alcohol-free person than I ever did as someone who drank alcohol. It's bizarre, really. But just sort of knowing that in your mind, being like, actually, yeah, like, this brand does some good alcohol-free stuff, and this one does as well. You start to build a picture that, yeah, if someone invited me to this party or to this wedding or whatever the occasion, I think I'd be pretty content having these drinks. And then you can start to try it. So I'd always say there's a run-up period, and that was important for me because it did set the scene. And I found that the first 30 days were, like I touched on earlier, I didn't really focus on anything else. So, like, that was my priority. And I encourage people to break it down in this way. Don't just say, I'm never going to drink alcohol again ever in my life, because it's such a massive statement. It's very hard to not be intimidated by that. The process I took was, I'm going to not drink alcohol for 30 days. And that seemed very manageable. And then I got to the end of the 30 days and was like, I'm going to do 90 days, but I've already done 30 of them. But what's actually happened there is that, like, if you go for 30 days, you're a different person at day 30 than you are to day 1. So when you then make that commitment for 90 days, you're doing it from a stronger and higher version of yourself. So I went 30 days and I was like, I'm going to do 90 days. Got to the end of 90 days and I was loving it. Like, I was physically seeing all of this improvement in many different areas of my life. And I was like, what if I could do a whole year, like a whole year alcohol free? And I'm already 25% of the way through. I've done 3 months. And so I made the commitment. And it was about 6 months into it, I just carried on with life as normal. After the first couple of months, it really just like you stopped thinking about it because it became so every day. But about 6 months into that commitment, I just knew. I was like, I'm going through the motions now to get to that year mark because I'm not drinking again. That's it. I'm done. And yeah, like it's never changed. And I've just never looked back. And I can honestly say I've never met anyone who's taken this journey and who's regretted it. Like never. Like it's such a worthwhile journey. So
Well, thank you. Such a calming voice,
yeah.
and a fantastic answer to that and success story. Two things that came up to me before I asked you to throw in your golden nuggets. One was in the beginning where you had mentioned that, this had no concept about it. It was strictly about the nightlife. But towards the end, it contributed to a charity. Even though it didn't start out that way, it still did contribute some kind of good in some capacity. So I do want to at least acknowledge that part for you. The second is you remind me so much of my father, or just your story. But his is a little different, and he's a recovering alcoholic as well. He's doing the same thing. He's going through that. I remember having a discussion with him. He would always say, he's like, I'm not an alcoholic. I'm not. And I was like, what do you mean you're not? You drink all the time, all throughout the day. He says, well, I'm not an alcoholic because I can stop anytime I want. And so I go, well, then stop. And he said, well, I don't want to. And I said, well, see, that is what makes you the alcoholic, Daddy.
Yeah.
He would go to therapy and the therapist would say, if you want to save your marriage, stop drinking. And he told me that. And then I would tell him, I said, well, Dad, if that's what it takes to save your marriage and you love Mom, you love your wife, why don't you do it? And he couldn't answer. All he could say is, that's a good question, baby. That's a good question. And we ended the conversation just like that because there was nothing, you can't push someone for an answer.
Yeah.
Right? They need to ponder that. He had moments just like you, driving drunk, having very near misses with the law and all of this stuff. And it took a while for, like, my mom had left him and then she forgave him and went back, and he was still on this path of drinking. Like, he was trying to navigate or negotiate. Let me say that. Negotiate. Well, yeah. I'm not drinking all the time. I'm not drinking as much. And I remember just like the lawyer, he had a lawyer at the time saying, no. When you're an alcoholic, you cannot drink, period, at all. And he was trying to figure out a way to keep the alcohol going, keep this high going. And it took really severe circumstances for him to really go away from that. And I really do applaud him because he has given up alcohol. The conversations that we have are very different. They're very clear, and I do enjoy that. Your story just related to me personally because it was with my father, and I know he looks at his children and sees that we've had bouts of alcoholism, and he reflects on that because he's like, I did that to my children, and I'm like, well, Dad, we make our own choices, like, So, Adrian, are you ready to give us your golden nuggets and add that ketchup just to recap for the folks?
Absolutely. Yeah. If you're still in this phase of drinking, I would highly encourage you to stop for 30 days and to just observe how you manage yourself, because similar to your father's story, Krystal, I can relate to so much of that, because you don't actually recognize that you have an issue when you're in the midst of that issue. Is when you stop and you look at it a bit more objectively. You're like, I think there's something there. So that's the first one I would say, is just give yourself the gift of a break. Like, you don't have to give up forever. There's nothing definite about it, but it's 30 days. The second nugget I would say is to use that time when you're not drinking to explore other areas of your life which you may not have given much time to or considered. because one of the blessings of stepping away from alcohol is all of a sudden you have so much time on your hands, and it's almost scary how much time you have on your hands. Like, you don't just want to like fritter that time away watching extra seasons of Netflix that don't really matter. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's not okay to do, but use it wisely. Like, think about some other things you've always wanted to do in your life, whether it's learn an instrument, whether it's go to particular places, maybe start a health regime, those type of activities, and tie it in with this period of abstinence. It's like 30 days, and just see how you get on, because you may just find quite sort of unexpected emotions and experiences of, I've really thoroughly enjoyed this activity and not one drop of alcohol was involved. And that in itself can be it can be a bit of an eye-opener for people, and enough to make them want to go another 30 days.
Yeah, thank you. Additional time and additional money, right? So
yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's the episode today. I truly appreciate you, Adrian, for sharing your vulnerability, because that's where it all starts. Mm-hmm. This is true in building networks, selling or promoting products, and creating and maintaining friendships just as much as it does with us conquering our inner demons. I ask you to think about any ill feelings you may have with someone, yourself, and ask why that is. Is it because it made you feel invalidated or less than? In feeling that way, has that altered the way you view others, relationships, or even yourself? Has it created a protective wall? And if so, why? What part of Adrian's story really made an impact on you? Maybe the college life activities brought up some memories, or some coping dependency revelations. Even if you feel you have made peace with all of your past grievances or bad decisions, I'd still want to hear about that pivotal moment that allowed peace to slip through and multiply. I love it all, and so will someone else. Before we let you go, Adrian, why don't you go ahead and remind the people who you are, where they can find your resources or reach out to you?
Absolutely. So, I'm Adrian Knight. As I'm sure you can tell by now, I'm British, so I'm based in England, just outside of London. The best place to find me is either my website, which is adrianknight.co.uk, that's Knight with a K, or social media. So my handle is Adrian J. Knight. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm particularly active on Instagram and post on there several times a day. And I've also got a TikTok, but I'm not still figuring that out, but it's all the same handle, Adrian J. Knight. And I absolutely love to hear from people. I love to sort of see people's like messages and to sort of talk through kind of where they're at. I hope to hear from you.
Awesome. I certainly understand the TikTok piece that I'm
everyone keeps saying it's like the next big thing, and I'm like, I get it, but I'm like, struggling. So still
we'll get there.
Work in progress.
We'll get there. Yeah. Well, Adrian's resources and connections are in the episode description, as well as on my website resources page, movingwithmeaning.com. Make sure you guys subscribe to the show, Moving with Meaning, the podcast, and tap that alert bell so you know when these episodes drop. I am on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, and now YouTube Music. Please share, like, repost, and follow. Tag someone. We are creating a community here. Quick housekeeping before you go. Follow me on Instagram at movingwithmeaning82. Also connect with me on LinkedIn. My YouTube channel, Moving with Meaning, is now up and running, so run across there and hit subscribe. I do dabble in TikTok at Krystal B. Clark, so links are in the episode. Alrighty, I'm Krystal on Moving with Meaning, the podcast, reminding you to take it one step at a time. All moves have meaning. Check y'all later.